What happens when two men walk into a room knowing they don't belong there, and choose to speak anyway? The studio lights are already hot before the cameras roll. Not metaphorically hot. Literally. The kind of heat that seeps through fabric, makes collars itch, forces a subtle sheen onto foreheads whether you want it or not. The kind of heat that reminds everyone inside this room that they are being watched. Judged. Consumed. The audience is settling in, a low hum of chatter bouncing off glossy floors and polished desks. Laughter flickers here and there, polite and pre-programmed, the kind that knows its cue before it ever hears the joke. Above it all, massive screens glow with familiar colors, branding burned into American television history. This is The View. A place where conversations don't just happen, they collide. At the table, the hosts are already seated. Papers aligned. Mugs placed just so. Smiles practiced, sharpened, and ready. The rhythm of the show is muscle memory now. Decades of timing. Decades of control. And then, the guests walk out. First, Mark Wahlberg. He moves with the quiet confidence of a man who has been in rooms far louder than this one. His shoulders are relaxed, but not loose. There's a discipline in the way he walks, the way his eyes scan before he sits. He nods, polite, respectful, but reserved. This is not unfamiliar territory, but it is hostile ground. Beside him, Jonathan Roumie. Different energy. Softer at first glance. Thoughtful. His posture carries a kind of stillness that doesn't come from nerves, but from intention. His hands clasp briefly before releasing, like he's grounding himself, reminding his body where it is before his mind catches up. The applause rises. Strong. Enthusiastic. But uneven. Some clap with admiration. Some clap out of obligation. And some don't clap at all. The men take their seats. For a moment, just a moment, everything feels normal. The opening pleasantries roll out smoothly. Smiles flash. Compliments are exchanged. The audience chuckles at a light remark. The tone feels friendly. Harmless. Safe. But safety, in this room, is an illusion. The camera cuts tighter. The lights seem brighter now. The air feels heavier, thicker somehow, like a storm gathering in silence. One of the hosts leans forward slightly. Her head tilts. The smile remains, but it sharpens. This is where it starts. Mark is asked about his faith. It's framed gently at first. Almost respectfully. A question about his journey. His openness. That moment in his career when something shifted, when he stopped compartmentalizing belief and started carrying it openly into a world that doesn't reward that kind of transparency. Mark exhales before he answers. Not a sigh. Something steadier. Measured. He speaks slowly. Carefully. Not because he's unsure, but because he knows every word will be dissected. He talks about discipline. About structure. About people who stepped into his life at pivotal moments and pulled him back from paths that would have ended very differently. His voice doesn't rise. It doesn't waver. But there's weight in it. History. He talks about mistakes. Not in detail. Not for spectacle. Just enough to acknowledge they exist. The audience listens. Some nod. Some cross their arms. Then it comes. A question that doesn't glide forward, it lunges. What was the worst thing you ever did? The room shifts. You can feel it before you see it. A ripple across the audience. A tightening in shoulders. The sudden awareness that something has just crossed an invisible line. Mark doesn't answer right away. His eyes flicker, just slightly, to the side. Not to avoid. To assess. To choose. This isn't curiosity. This is extraction. He smiles. Calm. Controlled. And then he refuses. Not defensively. Not angrily. But firmly. He reframes the question. Turns it inward. Talks about following when he should have led. About influence. About youth. About how easy it is to lose yourself when you don't yet know who you are. It's a masterclass in composure. The host nods, lips pressed together for half a second too long. Another host jumps in. Different angle. Same pressure. How do you do it, she asks. How do you stay on that path? Mark answers without hesitation. Prayer. The word lands heavier than expected. There's a beat. A pause that stretches just long enough to be uncomfortable. Then a voice cuts in, lighter, almost dismissive. Guided meditation. A few laughs ripple through the audience. Not roaring laughter. Testing laughter. The kind that looks around the room first to see if it's allowed. What if you don't pray? The host asks. Mark doesn't miss a beat. Now's a good time to start. More laughter. Louder this time. But the tension doesn't break, it coils tighter. Someone jokes about having someone pray for them. Mark nods. Sincere. I'll add you to my prayers. The room reacts. Some laugh awkwardly. Some clap. Some shift uncomfortably in their seats. Because suddenly, this isn't theoretical anymore. This isn't a philosophical debate. It's personal. Jonathan finally speaks. His voice is calm, but there's something deliberate in it. He talks about purpose. About feeling placed somewhere for a reason. About waking up each morning with gratitude, not obligation. He explains prayer not as ritual, but as conversation. As thankfulness. As grounding. For a brief moment, the room softens. And then, without warning, the tone pivots again. A joke about attractiveness. About faith being hot. Laughter spikes. The moment cheapens. Jonathan smiles politely. Mark chuckles once, then stills. The conversation swerves. Jonathan is asked about his physical transformation for a role. For playing Jesus. The audience perks up. The hosts grin. The tone becomes teasing, almost flippant. Jesus was ripped like that. Laughter explodes. Jonathan laughs along, but there's restraint in it. A careful boundary he doesn't cross. He redirects. Talks about preparation. About responsibility. About carrying weight that isn't physical. And then, just as he begins to explain how faith intersects with his work beyond explicitly religious roles, something strange happens. The energy changes. A producer's voice murmurs somewhere off camera. A hand lifts. The conversation cuts. Too quick. Too abrupt. Even one of the hosts looks surprised. The camera pulls back. The moment passes. The show moves on. But the damage is done. Because once you notice a cut like that, you can't unsee it. The audience feels it too. A murmur. Confusion. A collective sense that something was just taken away. And as the cameras roll on, smiles plastered back into place, one thing becomes clear. This wasn't just an interview. This was a test. And it's only just begun. The lion's den has revealed its teeth. The applause fades, but the tension doesn't. It lingers in the studio like leftover smoke after a fire alarm, thin, invisible, unmistakable. People shift in their seats, not enough to draw attention, just enough to get comfortable again. Or at least pretend to. The cameras are still rolling. The red lights are still on. The smiles are back in place. But something has changed. Mark Wahlberg leans back slightly in his chair now, one arm resting along the edge of the table. It's a subtle movement, almost casual, but it signals something important. He's no longer leaning in. No longer offering himself forward. Jonathan Roumie sits upright, hands folded loosely, eyes attentive. He looks calm, but there's a stillness in him that wasn't there before. The kind of stillness that comes when you realize the ground rules have quietly shifted. Across from them, the hosts regroup. There's a rhythm to daytime television: question, answer, joke, pivot, commercial. It's a dance perfected over decades. And when something threatens that rhythm, the instinct is always the same. Regain control. One of the hosts clears her throat and smiles again, wider this time. Too wide. So, she says lightly, let's talk about Hollywood. The word lands like a loaded weapon disguised as a party favor. Hollywood. The unspoken implication hangs in the air: you're in our world now. Mark nods slowly. He's been here before. More times than anyone at that table combined. But this isn't a movie set. There are no second takes. No editors to smooth the edges later. The host presses on, asking about standing firm in beliefs when the industry doesn't exactly reward that kind of conviction. The question sounds neutral, but the undertone isn't. It's probing. Testing. Mark answers honestly. He talks about living in different places now. About communities where faith isn't whispered, where people sing together, shake hands, hug during services. He describes it plainly, without nostalgia or judgment. The audience reaction is immediate and split. Some faces soften. Some harden. One of the hosts interrupts, a quick interjection that feels less like curiosity and more like correction. Well, that depends on what world you're in. Mark turns his head toward her. Not sharply. Just enough. His eyes meet hers, steady and unflinching. That's exactly my point, he says. There it is. Not loud. Not dramatic. But unmistakable. The conversation accelerates. Questions start overlapping. Hosts jump in faster now, stacking thoughts on top of each other. The tempo increases, as if speed might overwhelm substance. Jonathan listens closely, tracking the flow. When he speaks, it's with intention. He talks about roles. About comedy. About stepping out of the weight of portraying Christ and into something lighter, not to escape faith, but to express humanity. He mentions wearing a crucifix in a non-faith-based film. A small detail. A simple choice. And yet, the energy in the room tightens again. One of the hosts tilts her head, eyebrows lifting just a fraction. Another glances briefly off camera. It's barely perceptible, but it's there. Jonathan continues, explaining how rarely you see that kind of symbol on everyday characters in movies unless they're clergy. He talks about realism. About representing people you actually see on the street. And then, oh, already, a host blurts out. The words tumble out too fast, too surprised. The segment ends. Abruptly. The camera widens. Applause swells on cue. The music kicks in. But the applause is wrong. It's loud, but hollow. Performed. Even one of the hosts looks momentarily disoriented, as if she expected the conversation to keep going and instead ran headfirst into an invisible wall. Jonathan blinks once, then smiles politely. Mark nods, jaw tightening just slightly. They've been cut off. Not because of time. Because of content. The show moves forward, but the audience doesn't move with it. There's a murmur now, a low-level buzz of confusion and curiosity. People whisper to each other. Heads lean together. Phones shift in hands. Something doesn't add up. And viewers at home feel it too. Because this isn't subtle anymore. Later, when the conversation returns to Jonathan, the tone shifts again, this time under the guise of depth. A host asks a question that sounds thoughtful, even compassionate, about religion being weaponized and whether that frustrates him as a man of faith. Jonathan doesn't bristle. He doesn't deflect. He answers with clarity and restraint, speaking about injustice, about Christ confronting leaders who followed the letter of the law while abandoning its heart. His voice remains even, but there's conviction in it now. Not forceful, rooted. As he speaks, the studio grows quiet. This isn't the silence of boredom. It's the silence of attention. And then, just as he begins to connect the message, to bring it home, the interruption comes again. A producer's cue. A time constraint. Another cut. This one even sharper than the last. The audience reacts audibly now. A collective exhale. A few scattered boos, quickly swallowed by applause. Jonathan stops mid-thought. Not because he's finished. Because he's been stopped. The camera pulls away before the moment can breathe. For anyone watching closely, it's unmistakable. This isn't coincidence. This is pattern. And that realization hits Mark at the same time it hits Jonathan. You can see it in Mark's posture, how he straightens slightly, shoulders squaring. In Jonathan's eyes, how they lift briefly toward the lights, then settle forward again. They understand the rules now. And so does the audience. Faith is welcome here. As long as it stays vague. As long as it stays theoretical. As long as it doesn't name names. As long as it doesn't wear a cross. As long as it doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. The show barrels on toward its next segment, but the atmosphere never fully recovers. There's an edge now. A sense that something unscripted tried to break through and was forcefully contained. Viewers at home start rewinding. Posting clips. Commenting. Did you see that? Why did they cut him off? Was that intentional? And the most unsettling question of all, what would have happened if they hadn't? Because in those brief moments, those half-finished thoughts, something dangerous was happening. Not shouting. Not arguing. But clarity. And clarity, in a room built on control, is the most disruptive force of all. The lion's den didn't roar. It tightened its grip. The cameras stop rolling. And suddenly, the room exhales. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just enough for those paying attention to feel it, the subtle release of a held breath, the quiet relief of moving on. Crew members shift. Someone adjusts a headset. A producer glances at a clipboard and nods, satisfied. Another segment wrapped. Another potential problem contained. But the silence left behind is heavier than anything that was said on air. Mark Wahlberg stands first. He doesn't rush. He buttons his jacket slowly, deliberately, like a man reclaiming control over his own space. His expression is neutral, but his eyes tell a different story. Not anger. Not frustration. Resolve. Jonathan Roumie rises beside him. He smiles politely at a nearby crew member, thanks someone quietly. There's grace in his movements, even now. Especially now. But beneath that calm, something has shifted. A line has been crossed, and he knows it. They shake hands with the hosts. Brief. Professional. Cordial in the way people are when they know they'll never truly meet again. One of the hosts laughs lightly, tossing out a harmless closing remark meant to smooth the moment over. It hangs in the air, unanswered, then dissolves. Mark and Jonathan walk off stage. The studio lights dim behind them, but the glow doesn't disappear, it follows. Because out there, beyond the walls of the set, the conversation has already begun. Phones buzz. Clips circulate. Comment sections ignite. And the question spreads faster than any official narrative ever could: why did they cut him off? At home, viewers rewind. Again. And again. They notice the timing. The sudden interruptions. The way the conversation halts the moment faith becomes specific. The moment Jesus is named. The moment a cross is mentioned, not as metaphor, not as history, but as something living. Present. They noticed the reaction of the hosts. The surprise. The awkward laughter. The glances off camera. And then they noticed something else. This wasn't chaos. It was control. For nearly 2 decades, The View has mastered the art of steering conversations. Of letting people talk just enough to reveal themselves, but not enough to disrupt the narrative. The hosts know the cadence. The producers know the timing. The show knows exactly how far it can go. Which is why this moment stands out. Because the cut wasn't clean. It wasn't smooth. It was abrupt. Defensive. Reactive. And that makes it loud. Jonathan's unfinished sentence echoes in the minds of viewers far longer than any completed monologue could. The idea that something needed to be stopped, that something crossed an invisible threshold, forces people to ask why. What was so dangerous about a crucifix on a fictional character? What was so threatening about gratitude expressed through prayer? Why does faith feel acceptable only when it's abstract, but intolerable when it's embodied? Mark, later that evening, sits quietly. No cameras. No microphones. Just the weight of the day settling in. He's been in fights before, real ones, public ones, career-defining ones. This wasn't that. This was quieter. Sharper. Jonathan, too, reflects. He spent years portraying a man whose words unsettled the powerful, not because they were loud, but because they were true. Today, he caught a glimpse of that same discomfort, not in scripture, but in studio lights and production cues. Neither of them posts an angry rant. Neither of them calls out the show by name. They don't have to. Because the audience does it for them. Comments flood in. That cut was intentional. You could feel the tension. They were fine with faith, until it became real. Some viewers defend the show. Others question it. Debates ignite. Lines are drawn. But beneath all of it, something deeper is happening. People are recognizing themselves in that moment. In the discomfort. In the interruption. In the realization that certain truths are tolerated only when they remain toothless. And maybe that's why this interview hits so hard. Because it isn't about celebrities. It isn't about ratings. It's about what happens when conviction enters a space built on performance. The most telling part isn't what was said, it's what wasn't allowed to be finished. In the days that follow, clips rack up views. Reaction videos multiply. Slow-motion breakdowns analyze every facial twitch, every pause, every cutaway. People ask why this keeps happening. Why conversations about faith on mainstream television always seem to derail at the same point. Why sincerity is welcome, but certainty is not. And through it all, one image remains burned into memory. Jonathan, mid-sentence. Mark, watching carefully. The producer's cue. The sudden stop. Because sometimes, the clearest confession of discomfort isn't an argument. It's a silence. A forced one. And that silence says more than any monologue ever could. This wasn't a shouting match. It wasn't a meltdown. It was something far more revealing. A system protecting itself. A line drawn in real time. And 2 men who never raised their voices, yet still managed to disrupt the room simply by being exactly who they are. If you made it this far, ask yourself one thing: if there was nothing wrong with what was being said, why did it need to be stopped? And if this moment made you uncomfortable, maybe that's the point. Because growth doesn't come from silence. It comes from confrontation. From tension. From truth spoken calmly in places that would rather keep things safe. If you believe conversations like this matter, if you think moments like these deserve to be seen, discussed, and remembered, then make your voice part of it. Like the video. Comment your thoughts below, I want to hear them. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And subscribe for more deep dives into the moments mainstream media doesn't quite know what to do with. Because stories like this don't end when the cameras shut off. They begin there. And together, we keep making faith famous. See you next time.